Thank you for joining us again this week for another exciting AZ Hip Historian virtual tour. I'm Rico Burton, and I volunteer for the Arizona State Office of AARP. This is Black History Month. AARP celebrates African Americans year-round, and we're proud to support events where trailblazers, heroes, and sheroes are remembered, recognized, and highlighted for their many contributions to Black history. February is also African American History Month in America, Canada, and the United Kingdom for remembrance of important people and events in the history of the African diaspora. AARP's theme for this year's Black History Month campaign is centered on the resilience and beauty of Black joy, which is a joy supreme and seeks to uplift, inspire, and amplify how Black joy can be a source of healing and community building. Now, let's sit back in our front row seats and enjoy tonight's virtual happy hour tour. It's all yours, Marshall.
Well, hello, good evening. I am so happy you're here tonight. We've got such a great show for you. Oh, just you wait. I mean, it's like, I want to welcome all you folks who are out there watching on. I know we have a handful of folks out there on Twitch and on YouTube as well as on Facebook. So we've got so much fun. Now, what can you expect from tonight's show? Well, you know, if this is your first time here, we're going to do some trivia on just some classic places here in the Valley of the Sun. We're also going to do a little bit of an Arizona music history break, as well as Little Arizona, getting a chance to talk about an amazing small town right here in Arizona, as well as a little bit of show and tell. And of course, we have a special guest, as we always do. And just wait till you see the trivia that John has come up with tonight. So, in case you're wondering, who is that man on my screen? Why is he there? How did he get there? Well, I've been in Arizona a little over 21 years. Moved here from New York. I was actually working in Brooklyn at a Carnegie library. And, you know, we were not having weather kind of like what we were having today, where it was beautiful and sunny. It was cold. It was windy. There was far too much slush out there. And I decided it was time for a change. So I traded that little library, actually not so little of a library, in for a library in South Phoenix. And as soon as I got here, all I kept hearing about how there was no history. But what I loved was this little library was right in the middle of this community with a rich oral tradition of kind of how it got there. And so it really got me thinking about how there weren't a lot of people that were kind of putting together that kind of like mid-century or that modern history for us. And so folks like John and I are doing just that. Now, to get here, we loaded everything we own into a big orange cube, a U-Haul, and made that 4,000 mile or give or take a few miles, depending on how many times we got lost, with everything we owned. And you know what? Their international world headquarters are right here in the Valley of the Sun in an amazing building. Now, we promptly moved into a mid-50s ranch, actually 1956. Now, when we bought it, it was lots of tones of beige. I'm happy to say now it is two tones, seafoam and cantaloupe. Much more simplified than all those tones of beige. Now, that's what my kitchen looks like today. It's kind of a time warp. All that buttercream yellow tile with the matching appliances that match that tile as well. That's pretty much the reason why I bought the house, was because it really was a time capsule. Now, like I said, as soon as I got here, all I kept hearing from folks that there was no history here. But I knew that wasn't true, because every time I went somewhere, I kept coming face to face with so many amazing people, places, and stories that It got me thinking about a whole other way of life, which I'm now happy to say I'm leading. And then you have that post-war boom. All those GIs that either were stationed here, trained here, or passed on their way to somewhere else. And after the war, they were moving here in huge numbers. And in so many cases, looking for a house just like mine. Now, I said my name is Marshall Shore. I'm also known as the Hip Historian. Now, you might wonder, how does one get a name like the Hip Historian? Well, back in 2012, on February 14th, we had celebrations across the state. And on Valentine's Day of 2012, we had one heck of a celebration for Statehood Day. And I was allowed 15 minutes on the main stage to talk about anything I wanted to. And I chose one of the most favorite events that most people don't remember. It was called Mask of the Yellow Moon. It ran from 1926. The last one was in 1955. At its height, it had over 5,000 high school and college students performing. It was really touted right up there as something that everyone in the country should go and see, along with something else like Mardi Gras. And I was lucky enough to find 3 dresses in a box. So I had some amazing friends don those dresses, and we talked about Mask of the Yellow Moon for my 15 minutes, and that was so much fun. And so I started doing a variety of tours, lectures, and things like that. And, in this moment, I knew none of those were really going to happen. So, because all my tours, all my lectures were canceled. And so pretty much that's the reason why I started doing this, because I quickly realized, I wasn't sharing stories with anyone, and no one was sharing their stories with me. So that's why I started doing this. Now, we have started doing a second Saturday downtown walking tour. This coming Saturday is sold out. And the next round will be Saturday, March 13th. Now, I will ask you, if you're watching on Facebook, if you can click on share, so that way all your friends can see all the fun that you're having as we get a chance to explore some incredible memories for so many of you, and for many people, like myself, that moved here after it. It just kind of helps put things in context for how the valley grew and kind of what's going on here now. So as we get ready for some show and tell, because, I have a house full of stuff. So since we're talking about kind of the growth or the entertainment side of Phoenix, I thought we should talk a little bit about building. And so you had so many builders building houses. And so this is Happy Homer. He was a premium that if Stag's built was they built your house, you could get one of these. They also did salt and pepper shakers, and, kind of like right up there with the Blakely glasses. I mean, so many people kind of cover them. And here you can actually see, here's actually a really cool billboard that was right on Central. You can see what is called the Punch Card Building. Whether or not it was designed to look like a punch card, that's a whole different story. But you can see, I mean, they were building around from the 50s into the early 70s. So you could get a wide variety of premiums, such as a Happy Homer, just like this little guy that would sit there and nod. And because it is indeed a happy hour, it wouldn't be a happy hour without a cocktail. And, I just came back from the Hotel Valley Ho, where PJ made an incredible cocktail. Now, some of you might be questioning some of the ingredients. I mean, when I first saw his list of things, my first thought, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so sweet, like pie filling, which it's not. And then I got to that very last ingredient, that mozzarella water. And oh my gosh, just wait till you see what my silent bartender is able to turn out with this. Now, this cocktail is called Steamboat Treat because indeed the Copper Bell was famous for its apple pie with a little bit of cheddar cheese on top, as well as a brandy sauce. And so there's what it looks like. And the mozzarella water, JP said it kind of takes on because one of the restaurants we were talking about was actually owned by Tomas, who just recently passed away. And then, and then that's a little spritz of some sort of cinnamon magic. So, all right. So there you go. We have, there we go. So there is our treat. And so there we go. And I was just talking to PJ because he's starting to put so much effort into some of these stories of the cocktail that it's like, we just need to, I think we're going to try and actually make some videos of him talking about those stories along with the cocktails so that people can make them and follow along with all his list of ingredients. So, all right. So with the miracle of modern technology and my assistant, Bob the Clown, we are able to bring to you live through the interwebs my friend John Bueker. Now, he was a former classroom teacher. Now he is an instructional designer at ASU. Now, he, like so many of us, was not born here, but he was born in Detroit and then was raised right here in Phoenix. And, that child who never really let go of it. In fact, he has really focused on that kind of that mid-century culture, creating a series of websites that focus on that history, that commemorate a variety of sites around the valley. He also edits a newspaper, which he'll talk about, called Joan d'Arc Crusader. He's been doing that since he was 9 years old. Isn't that amazing? He now is working with Contractor and Community Magazine as one of their writers. And you can find his website, and we will talk about that as you go along. So without any further ado, I would love to bring on John. Hello.
Good evening, Marshall.
How are you? So, I think you might have a cocktail there. I think we'd do a cheers to start the night off.
I do.
Very
Salute.
good. Indeed. Chin chin. So did I miss anything? Do you want to say anything else about yourself before we launch into and start talking about some of the trivia? Because there's lots of good stories there.
I would mention that I also wrote a book on Legend City, which was published about...
Oh, crap. I can't believe I left that out. I am so sorry.
It's okay. It came out about 7 years ago. And so I suppose I'm one of the leading authorities on our beloved old amusement park, Legend City. So I would mention that. But you covered everything else pretty well.
All right. Very good. Now, for those of you that actually saw the video that I showed at the beginning, what I will do is I will show that at the end. Now, the caveat is it has no sound, but it is from Legend City. And on the boat ride is actually my friend Ace's dad. I was doing a show. I was doing a presentation in Valley Bar back when we used to be able to congregate in bars, and showed that. And Ace was like, I think that's my dad. And sure enough, a few texts later, sent him a couple of screenshots of it, and indeed it was.
That's cool.
So,
very cool.
Yeah. So now we always do trivia. And so our trivia is a little different because it's basically mainly built around being able to tell good stories. So the trivia is always multiple choice. So that way, even if you don't know the answer, maybe you're like me and didn't move here till long after all the things we're going to talk about have been gone. But they are still so much just kind of in the fabric of the valley. And so even if you don't know, you can take a stab at the answer and have a good shot of getting it right. All right. So now you can keep track of your score. You can either do it on a pad and paper. You could do it, we did have somebody who did keep track of it with a Sharpie on their leg. You can do it whatever makes you happy. So it's all good. All right. So as we go down our trivia, so our first part is all about Christown Mall.
And Marshall, each of my trivia questions are drawn from my websites. So we have some Christown questions and some Legend City questions and a few other odds and ends, but they're all drawn from joandarc.com, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, exactly. Because I know people, it's like you have your website right there. So if you wanted to go to that, they could, but not yet because no cheating. You can't go to these websites and look up the answers.
That's right. Honor system.
Exactly. All right. So question number 1. Name the 3 courts in the original Christown Mall. Was it A, flowers, fountains, and forest? Was it B, flowers, mirrors, and birds? C, fountains, birds, mirrors? Or was it D, flowers, fountains, and birds? All right. So there were 3 courts in the original Christown Mall. What were those? All right. Question 2. Name the popular Christown sculptures created by renowned Kansas City sculptor Jack T. Bowen. Bonus points for their location in the mall. Oh, getting a little tricky. All right. So was it A, Chico the Parrot and Ferdinand the Bull? B, Ferdinand the Bull and the Roadrunner? C, Roadrunner and Saguaro Cactus? Or D, Saguaro Cactus and Ferdinand the Bull? So there were 2 sculptures there. Can you name what were the 2 sculptures by Jacques T. Bowen? And question 3. Phoenix resident Dick Guthrie earned extra money for college by providing what service at the Christown Mall in the mid-60s? A, washing cars. B, cleaning the fountain. C, rickshaw rides. Or D, as an organ grinder. So Mr. Guthrie did one of those to make extra money in the 60s at Christown. Which one was it? All right, name the iconic underground Christown Tavern and its precise location in the mall. Was it A, Elephant Bar? B, Custodian's Corner? C, Janitor's Closet? Or D, Christown Saloon? Which one of those was an iconic underground Christown Tavern? All right, and so now we are moving on to some Legend City. All right, question 5. Cochise's Stronghold River Ride was originally known by what name? A, River of Legends. B, Adventure River. C, Fort Geronimo. or D, Fort Bowie? Which one of those was Cochise' stronghold? All right. We've made it over that hump. And so now, what was the name of the saloon in the Lost Dutchman mine ride? Was it A, the Drunken Dutchman, B, Gold Mine Inn, C, Superstition Saloon, or D, Last Chance Saloon? What was the name of the saloon in the Lost Dutchman mine ride? In what venue did Walsh and Ladmo do most of their stage shows at Legend City? A, the Little Theater, B, Lagoon Amphitheater, C, Golden Palace Saloon, or D, the Opera House? What venue did Walsh and Ladmo mainly use while performing at Legend City? Question 8. What two long-standing attractions were removed from Legend City when Compton Terrace was built in the late 90s? So those two attractions that were removed, was it A, Lost Dutchman Mine Ride and the Antique Car Ride, B, Boot Hill and the Golden Palace Saloon, C, the Antique Car Ride and the Miniature Golf Course, or D, the Penny Arcade and the Sky Ride? Not the Sky Ride. All
Marshall,
right.
that's late 70s, not late 90s.
All right. And then part 3 coming up is the Copper Bell, which tonight's cocktail was based on. What longtime legendary Phoenix construction firm built the riverboat restaurant, the Copper Bell? A, was it Del Webb? Was it B, Holmes and Son, C, Staggs Built Corporation, or D, Sun Valley Construction? So which of those companies built the Copper Bell? All right. And coming up for our West question, which is going to be all about miniature golf, a company called Western Recreation, Inc. operated a trio of miniature golf courses in Phoenix in the 60s and 70s. What were the name of those 3 courses? Was it A, Putt Putt, Alpine Valley, and Golf and Stuff? B, Hanalei, Green Gables, and Putt Putt? C, Golf and Stuff, Green Gables, and Alpine Valley? Or D, Green Gables, Alpine Valley, and Hanalei? So what were the 3 golf courses that were managed by, the miniature golf courses were managed by Western Recreation, Inc.? All right. So while you're telling your scores, I'm going to let you do that. We're going to take a brief music break. Now, during our music break, we rarely play music because we don't have copyright. And so unless I can pretty much get someone to say, yes, you can play my song, I will play it. But without that, we're not going to do that. So tonight, we are going to be talking about C.C. Peniston. Now, she moved here as a child. And in the 90s, her song finally, oh my gosh, would probably almost any club across the country, it was on a regular rotation as well as radio stations. And so I never realized she was doing that all from here. And so originally she was also a beauty queen. In the late 80s, she was Miss Black Arizona and then went on to become Miss Galaxy. Now she got her start because Felipe Delgado, who was a DJ at the time, had her do background vocals on Tanya Davis's album. Now, Philippe was also known because he not only just found CC, but he was also the founder and pioneer of Arizona hip hop and R&B and dance right here in Arizona. And so CC today is still recording and also spends a lot of time raising money for youth. So I love that she's still around and working right here in the Valley. All right, so now we're going to get some answers to all those questions. All right, so what were the 3 courts in the original Christown Mall and their locations? All right, so it was D. We had the Court of Flowers, Fountains, and Birds. And so where were those, John?
The Court of Flowers was at the east end of the mall near Corix, which later became the Broadway. The Court of Fountains was in the center court, just outside of Penny's. It actually had 3 fountains originally in the Court of Fountains. And the Court of Birds, which was probably the most popular and most memorable of the 3, was down on the west end, just outside of Ward's and Woolworths.
Ah, okay. And they looked really fancy.
Yeah, they had like about 90 birds in 7 different cages and very colorful pop art, very googie 60s art vibe. It was very cool.
And the answer on this was D.
D is correct.
All right. So question 2. Those 2 sculptures that were created by Jacques Thibault were Ferdinand the Bull and the Roadrunner. And that answer is B. And so what was unique about these? I mean, it looks like they probably were quite colorful.
They were. Ferdinand was originally put in the Court of Flowers near Corix, and Roadrunner was down at the other end of the mall in the Court of Birds. And I can remember Ferdinand being moved around. He was in different locations over the years. They kind of moved him around a bit. And there were always kids climbing on him, and he was very popular. But I was contacted by the artist's family years ago. They discovered the Christown website, and they know that he made an important contribution to it. So they emailed me some really cool photos, 2 of which are seen here and are on the website, and some other really interesting information about him. For example, he did not put a period after his middle initial, little eccentric. That's why there's no period after T. It's just Jack T. Bone.
Okay.
So a very interesting guy. He was an artist in Kansas City, and he did a lot of paper mache work, a lot of sculpture. Very interesting. And he contracted with Christown to do these 2 pieces, and there you have it.
Very cool. So do we know what happened to them?
You know, it's kind of interesting. I remember, like in the 80s or 90s, driving through my old neighborhood, Westtown. It's kind of funny you mentioned Happy Homer earlier. We grew up in the Westtown area, which was built by Staggs, of course. And I remember driving through there like in the 80s or 90s, and I saw Ferdinand in somebody's front yard in Westtown. So apparently he was retired, and somebody acquired him and put them in his front yard. So what became of the Roadrunner, I have no idea.
Okay. Wow. And now, were these paper mache? Because I'm like, that couldn't have been good in the environment out here.
Exactly. It deteriorated rapidly.
Oh, that's such a shame.
They were beautiful pieces, and we have, nice photos of them. So.
All right. So what did Guthrie do to make extra money? Rickshaw rides. or C? So indeed, rickshaw.
Yeah, he was a college student in Phoenix in the early 60s, and he actually built his own rickshaw at home. And he took it to Christown one day and said, "Hey, I can give rickshaw rides to your guests out to their car in the parking lot." And so the management of Christown was amenable to this, and so for the next couple of years, he gave some rickshaw rides to people at Christown.
Wow, so he was really a precursor to the little bike taxis that we used to have running around downtown when people were running around downtown.
Right.
Wow. All right, question 4. The legendary underground Christown Tavern was the janitor's closet. C. All right. And so now where was it?
This was a pretty easy one because a lot of people remember Janitor's Closet. You see people talking about it on Facebook quite a bit. It was located near the Court of Flowers on the East End near Corix, later Broadway. And it was underground. When they built Christown, they incorporated basement areas in different parts of the mall for storage and so forth. And they converted one of those areas into a bar and called it Janitor's Closet. And it opened in like 67. And a couple years later, they opened a second location at Thomas Mall.
So do you think the space is still there?
It's a great question. I wondered that myself. I don't know if they filled it in or it's still sitting there. I really don't know.
Because I know there's now some new walls that may cover up even possible stairways that might have led to it. So it could, in theory, still be there.
It's one of those Christown mysteries. Another great Christown mystery is the time capsule. When Christown was opened in 1961, they buried a time capsule out in the front by the flagpole. And nobody knows what happened to the time capsule. There are several theories. One of them is that it was stolen by an employee shortly after that. Some people think it was removed when they reconfigured the front of Christown and moved the flagpole. And another theory is that it's still there somewhere, and we just don't know where it is, which is the most intriguing possibility of all, I suppose.
Well, see, and I think that has happened. It's like where a building, something will happen, and it's like somebody forgets where it is, and then like years later, they're doing something and suddenly discover the time capsule.
I hope they find it. I'd love to see what's in it.
I know, that would be so cool. All right. Cochise Stronghold River Ride was originally known as River of Legends Ride. And that answer was A. So what was the River Ride?
Well, it was river boats going down the river through gunfights, and there was a dinosaur for some reason that would peek out over the rocks to scare people, and rocks would fall on you. And there was also a magical cave that the boat would move through with all kinds of weird stuff inside of it.
Oh, that's right, because there was the waterfall.
Yes, the waterfall.
And so they would have to shut off the waterfall before they went through.
Correct. And remember, the original concept of Legend City was it was celebrating Arizona legends, hence the name. So, for example, Lost Dutchman Mine Ride was one of the top legends that was celebrated. And so a lot of the names were oriented to legend, because that was the original idea behind the park.
Now, I've got several friends that used to actually work the riverboat ride. And so, and I guess they had a script they would follow that also told them like when to shoot at the dinosaur, as well as when to shut the water off before they went through the waterfall to get into the cave. And sometimes the timing got a little off and they would forget to shut the waterfall off. And they would go through and soak everybody.
On the Legend City website, there's a couple of audio files that have immortalized the riverboat riders and their script. So you can listen to the whole thing. It's the way it was back in the late 60s is what those recordings were.
Now I remember hearing towards the end of Legend City, they got a little loose with the script, probably even more than just a little bit loose.
Yeah, my understanding is there was a number of versions of the script. Legend City was closed down in the mid 60s, went into bankruptcy. It was closed down for a couple of years, and then Sam Schoen, the U-Haul magnate, reopened the park in the late 60s. But they had to write a new script because all the stuff had been lost. So there were several versions of the script. And yeah, towards the end, it got a little loose. The ride was renamed Adventure River at the end, which was one of our multiple choice answers.
Right.
So yeah, you're correct. Things got a little sloppy towards the end.
All right. So question 6 was, what was the name of the saloon in the Lost Dutchman mine ride? And it was D, Last Chance Saloon. So now, was it like a Disneyland thing where there was a bar in the ride that you could go to, or was it just a prop, or?
Yeah. Well, the Lost Dutchman mine ride was essentially you would ride through several buildings, and at the beginning you would kind of go underground and then up through several buildings, where you would see a barber shop and a home cabin scene with some weird figures in it, and you go through the saloon. The saloon was the last part of the ride, and that sign you see in the picture, the Last Chance Saloon. I actually met the fella who is now in possession of this sign, a guy by the name of Dave Adams. And I visited him one day. He has some wonderful stuff from Legend City. I think he got it at the auction, Legend City auction in 1984. So I have a picture of me holding that sign on the Legend City website, which was an honor because I consider that one of the greatest artifacts from the park. Was the Last Chance Saloon sign on the mine ride. Most people consider the mine ride their favorite ride in the park. It's very popular.
So okay, so it wasn't a water ride because we already had that. So was it more like a roller coaster? What was the mine ride?
Well, it was a mine car that you would get into, like not unlike a roller coaster. But it would just, no, it wasn't a roller coaster. It would just, the mine car would move through all these fantastic buildings and sites. And there was originally a huge spider that would scare you. They took that out after the first couple of years. But it was just lots of skeletons, ghosts. It was supposed to be a haunted mine.
Okay.
There's some pretty good pictures of the inside of it on the website, and there's also an audio file where you can listen to the weird sounds that people would experience moving through the mine ride. It's an interesting snapshot of what was going on there in the late 60s.
All right. So what venue did Walson Ladmo use mostly for their stage shows at Legend City? And that is B, the Lagoon Amphitheater. So why was it called the Lagoon Amphitheater?
Well, it was on the lagoon.
Good reason.
Yeah, there was a lagoon where there was an amphitheater perched on the edge of it, and there were little vehicles you could ride a ferry across the lagoon, and there was also a canoe ride, and things you could actually do in the lagoon.
Okay.
But the Lagoon Amphitheater was built right on the edge, and that's where Wallace and Ladmo did most of their performances. And they were there like every weekend for 20 years. I mean, Wallace and Ladmo spent a lot of time in Legend City, and they promoted it on the show.
Okay.
And they did some stuff in the Golden Palace Saloon, a couple other places, but primarily Lagoon Amphitheater is where Wallace and Ladmo did their performances.
Ah. So what else did they do in the Lagoon Amphitheater other than Wallace and Ladmo? I mean, was it kind of like where they had like regularly scheduled things on?
Yeah, they did concerts and dance performances, dramatic presentations. Whatever local talent or talent passing through town they could recruit. Whatever the act was, they were presented there or at the Golden Palace Saloon, of course, which later became the Red Garter, and finally the Opera House was the final incarnation of the Golden Palace.
All right. So now in the late 70s, we had Compton Terrace come in. What two rides were removed so that they could have that concert venue? And it was the antique car ride and the miniature golf course, probably one of the two most kind of land hungry locations. And
exactly.
I think that was C was the answer for that.
Correct. Yeah, this was in the southeast corner of Legend City, where they decided to build Compton Terrace. And so, yeah, those were two rather large parcels of land for those two attractions, and that's what they decided to take out. The antique car ride was a constant headache over the years because the cars kept breaking down, and it was hard to get parts to repair them. So that might have been a factor in the decision to tear it down. But it was sad because that was one of the original attractions, Legend City, and a very popular one. And a miniature golf course was there for a long time too. And incidentally, Western Recreation, the company we mentioned earlier, had a hand in setting up the miniature golf course at Legend City as well.
So, growing up as a kid, anytime I went to an amusement park, they almost always had their own version of like Autotopia or something where you got an old timey car or a little sports car and drove around the track that you couldn't get lost because you couldn't go anywhere. But as a kid, being able to turn the wheel and feel the car actually turn was so exciting.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was like I was driving.
There was actually two car rides at Legend City originally. There was also a modern car ride, which was located not far from the lagoon, actually. So there were actually two car rides there when the park first opened.
Oh, so one was the old timey cars, and then what was the other one?
Modern cars. They looked like little sports cars.
Oh, wow!
And this was a bone of contention with Louis Crandall, who, of course, built the park. He didn't approve of this because it didn't fit in, of course, with the Old West legend theme. But they talked him into doing it because they felt like they needed some more modern stuff, to attract a bigger audience to the park. So he made a compromise there where they built the modern car ride as well.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that it was his park. That's so interesting.
Yeah, it was Lewis's idea, and he put it together and got it built. A pretty amazing achievement for Phoenix in the early 60s.
Well, and I love how it was very much a family affair. I mean, everybody in his family got involved.
Absolutely.
Because I remember the 50th anniversary they had over there at the Heritage Center it was like there were so many of the Crandalls there.
Yes. Oh yeah, they're a great family. They're great friends. When Lewis first discovered my website, he was thrilled because he thought that everybody had forgotten about Legend City and it was a forgotten thing, which of course is far from the case. So he was really happy to discover there were people who love Legend City and still talk about it, and we became very good friends. It was a great experience to know him.
I met him. I met him first at the 50th anniversary, and then I got a hold of the film footage that I showed earlier, and I actually flew up to Provo and gave him a copy and sat there and watched it with him.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was so, because he kept pointing out, going, "Oh, there's so and so, there's so and so,"
Yeah,
and so it was really great to see him just get all misty eyed looking at those
yeah.
days.
It was a big part of his life, and he poured his heart and soul into it.
Well, and a big part of the valley. I mean, so many people talk about going there.
Absolutely.
And then also, then you have, I mean, the fact that we still don't have a major amusement park even after Legend City.
That's the legacy of Legend City. Developers have been reluctant to build another park, which is silly because now we have the population base and that we didn't have back at, when Legend City was first built, we didn't really have the population to support it. It was a little bit ahead of its time.
I know, because I think now if they built it, it would be huge because there's so
Absolutely.
many people. I mean, because you would have the little, there was a little holiday world there along the 10 that it would open up just for Christmas. It was like a
Right.
little Christmas amusement park,
Yeah.
and that was always packed. So, and I know they've tried to plan things for like Casa Grande. It's like, so you've had people talk about doing different amusement parks kind of in the middle of Arizona.
Right. They keep
But
talking about it.
they keep talking about it, but no rides yet.
No.
All right. And so, who built the Copper Bell? It was Holmes and Son. And so that is, the answer is B for that one. So what was the Copper Bell?
Well, it was a restaurant that was built to resemble one of the steamboats that would ride up the Colorado River back in the 19th century. And it was one of those thematic restaurants that were popular during this period. Phoenix had a number of them. Green Gables at 24th and Thomas, of course, with the knight on the horse and the medieval castle motif. And we had the islands on 7th Street south of Camelback. And there was Neptune's Garden, Alpine Village. They were both at around 7th Avenue and Camelback. So it was real popular in the 50s, 60s to have these thematic restaurants. And Copper Bell is the one I remember the best. Our family went to it there a number of times, and it was just so cool. It was built to resemble a riverboat. It had a paddle wheel that would turn through a pool of water. The detail was really meticulous, inside and out. It's a funny story. Shortly after the Copper Bell opened, somebody saw some smoke coming out of the top of the restaurant, and they called the Phoenix Police Department, of course, who immediately went down there with their sirens blaring. But as it turns out, that was a feature of the restaurant. They had these smokestacks. It was a simulated smokestack that was fed by natural gas to create the effect. And so the restaurant manager had to explain this to the firemen, that yes, there's supposed to be smoke coming out of the top of the restaurant. Sorry about that. But it was just a really cool place, and I remember it fondly. And I have a little website with some pictures, and you mentioned Tommaso Maggiore, who passed away just very recently. He purchased Copper Bell in the late 70s and turned it into an Italian restaurant. But Copper Bell had a great run for about 20 years, and a lot of people still remember it.
And where was the Copper Bell?
16th Avenue and Camelback.
Oh my gosh, something on the west side that wasn't. So basically, there was something else between Maryvale and the east side.
Yes, amazing, isn't
It is. So, and then Nancy brings up the Big Apple. So yeah, so I mean, we had a number of themed restaurants around town.
it? Yeah, good example.
So yeah, I mean, well, I mean, I think that was a craze at the time period, just trying to play up on the entertainment aspect of dinner and entertainment.
Exactly. It's kind of a lost art now.
Yeah, you know, you're right. Maybe somebody, well, after we're out of whatever we're in right now and things get a little more settled down, maybe somebody will open up something
Well,
other than Rainforest Cafe.
yes. Well, hopefully they'll build another Copper Bell. That would be my wish.
So what type of food do they have at the Copper Bell?
Well, it was Southern dishes. My personal favorite was a dish called the chicken and rice skillet, which was fried chicken with rice and peas. I was very fond of that. But you could get jambalaya, different Southern dishes. There's a menu on my website if you care to look, copperbellrestaurant.com. But yeah, it was very Southern sensibility.
I mean, and and it's so funny because some people talk about, I mean, I've got a friend who talks about how he took his prom date there.
Right.
I've got friends who have photos of themselves as like at 4 years old standing in front of the Copper Bell. So, I mean, it was quite popular.
Absolutely. Let's see, I'm looking at the menu now. They had Louisiana prawns, jambalaya. You mentioned the hot apple pie with cheese. That was very popular.
Oh, and then Veer says, so when did the Copper Bell actually close?
It actually closed in the late 70s. Towards the end, it was purchased by some people who actually introduced Chinese food there, which was kind of a departure, obviously. But it closed in around 1978. And then Tommaso purchased it, and he opened Maggiori's, which was an Italian restaurant, in 1979.
Okay. And we were just talking, and then Vera also asked, is the building still there or has it been demolished? And we were just talking, it is still there, but it no longer has a steamboat motif.
No, that's long gone.
So that is long gone. And you were saying it's now a Korean barbecue, which I should know because it's right down the street from me. So
yeah, last I heard, it's Han Korean barbecue. We actually went there a year or two ago. It was very good. And it was, just cool to be there in the old Copper Bell.
Indeed. All right. And then besides eating, we've talked about miniature golf, but we had a lot of miniature golf here in the Valley.
Yeah, I mean, it was very popular. It dates back at least to the early 50s.
Oh, wow. So Golden Gables had its own, or Green Gables had its own miniature golf?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, so we have Green Gables.
A man by the name of Reed Price built Green Gables miniature golf course in the early 50s. And 5 or 6 years later, then he formed Western Recreation, and they built some of the other courses.
So we had Green Gables, Hanalea, and Alpine Village. So the answer for this is
Alpine Valley.
Alpine Valley, and so that is D.
Alpine Valley is the one that we went to on the west side. It was on 27th Avenue, actually due south of what became Metro Center, between Dunlap and Northern. And it was really a wonderful course. And so I have my own little website on Alpine Valley. And last year, I actually got some photos the website existed for about 15 years before I even had some good photos of the golf course. But yeah, there's some nice photos now on the website. And Alpine Valley was just wonderful. It was a really cool course, and it was fairly close to our house, so that's where we went.
And so, where was Hanalei?
Hanalei was on West Thomas, like about 24th Avenue.
Ah, okay.
It was originally called Westwood Acres. It had a Western motif, Old West, but Western Recreation reformatted it into a Hawaiian theme back in the mid-'60s.
Wow, which actually would have been right on par with like Bikini Lounge going tiki in the islands. So some of those famous tiki restaurants.
Was that a pun, Marshall? Right on par?
But I'm pumped. So, and then what was Green Gables golf course like?
Well, it had the same theme as the restaurant, the medieval castles and knights, and the same holes that most golf courses had. It had a windmill, and a church and those sorts of things.
Okay.
Some of these themes were recurring through all the miniature golf courses.
Right, because you only had and they would just change the paint scheme to suddenly fit Alpine Valley. Now it's the Swiss Alps.
Exactly.
Nice. All right. So how did people, okay, so now now plug your website where people can find more of this and what we were talking about. Some of those photos.
All links to all of my websites. I have a Legend City website, Christown, Copper Bell we've talked about. I have a website I built for the wonderful grade school I went to, Saguaro Elementary School. Westtown Shopping Center was the shopping center I grew up with, so I have a website for that. So you can find links to all of my websites at www.joandarc.com. Joan d'Arc Avenue is the name of the street I grew up on. We were at like 33rd Avenue, a couple blocks south of Thunderbird, which at that time in the early 60s was in the desert. I mean, this was out on the frontier back then. It's hard to imagine now. But so Joan d'Arc Avenue is where I grew up, and so it's sort of the brand, if you will, for my collection of websites of Phoenix history.
Now, I do see a comment from Dudley about how he lived next door to Hank, who had been the head maintenance guy at Green Gables, as well as did some of the artwork.
Very cool.
Yeah. I love when you start talking about these things. It's like people just suddenly start talking about neighbors, weddings they went to, or anniversaries. I mean, some of these special places where people would go to really celebrate, and it brings back those memories.
Absolutely. And it's amazing how many people share similar memories. It's kind of hard to remember, but back in the 60s, Phoenix was a much smaller place than it is now. And so there's a lot of shared experiences. We would go to Christown Mall and we'd run into our next door neighbor, because there just weren't as many people and everybody was going to the same places.
Right.
So it was a nice time. Phoenix was becoming a big city, but it was still kind of a small town in some ways. So it was a nice mixture back then.
Indeed. All right. So let's find out how people did. I mean, I saw a lot of right answers. So how did you all do out there? I mean, you're only competing against yourself because we have no prizes, but just kind of wondering. I mean, sometimes we get people who got all of them right. Sometimes we get folks who got very few right, but the goal is not how much you were able to get right, but learning some of the stories if you didn't know them, or reliving some of those stories. That's what is the important part, is just learning more about that fabric that makes us. Oh, I like John. He's like fair to Midland. Yeah. Understandable. All right, John, thank you so much for coming on tonight and sharing some of your passions with us.
Well, Marshall, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Had a good time.
Very good. We'll have a great rest of your night. And actually, I think, did you drink all your wine yet, or do you have one last sip?
I have a little left here.
All right, so here, let's do one last cheer. Actually, wait a minute. Let me make the photos big. There we go. So we can see that last cheer. So cheer.
Clink.
Clink indeed. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Marshall.
Oh my gosh, that was so much fun. And some of those I knew, some of them I didn't. So that's always the fun. All right, so now maybe you were watching and you weren't quite sure whether you should click on that share. But now, indeed, you probably saw how much fun we were having talking about Phoenix in the old days. So click on share and let your friends know what fun we were having. So our next portion is one that's near and dear to my heart. It is sponsored by the First Families of Arizona. You can track them down on Facebook under First Families of Arizona, or their website, which is their acronym, which is tffoa.org. I know they're doing some virtual programming that's really great. Now, to be a member of the First Families, you've got to be able to prove your family lineage back to pre-statehood. But with virtual, they are doing some really great programs that anyone can attend. And that crowd has so many amazing stories to share. So this is called Little Arizona. And it's an opportunity to really kind of explore kind of my own roots because, I talk about how I was in New York City, but I grew up in Indiana in a small farm town of literally 25 people. 2 roads, 1 stop sign. Way at the end of town, there was a flashing light for a highway that turned. And so I always have an affinity for those little places. So what we do with this is try to really focus on towns. I like to try and stay around 1,000 or less. Sometimes we go above that. It all depends on, again, is it a good story? And so tonight we are talking about Stanfield, Arizona, which is in Pinal County, has a population of 515 people. It's just outside of, Casa Grande. It's probably about 10 minutes from Casa Grande. Now, initially, Stanfield, Arizona was actually called Summerland. One of the original homesteaders prior to 1915 was Nixon Winslow Stanfield. Now, he donated money. He donated the land and helped build the Adobe School, which we see here in this photo. And there is indeed Mr. Stanfield. He was also the first postmaster in town. And so they eventually changed the name of the town to his last name. Now, sadly, that Adobe Schoolhouse is long gone. Now, one of the claims to fame is John Wayne had a ranch there. He actually had 2 in Arizona, and this one grew cotton. And he was not a good farmer, but he noticed the guy Lewis's farm next door, he was always growing a lot more cotton. And so they entered into an agreement where if he could grow so much cotton a year on John Wayne's property, he would get a brand new Cadillac every year. And it's said that he got a brand new Cadillac every year but one. And then there is Lewis Johnson's wife, Alice, as she was showing her friends that indeed she could get out there and pick cotton. Now, if you drive through Stanfield today, you'll see what I think is really interesting is this very modern structure. Mid-50s, was part of a local chain down there called Fabs. Now that building pretty much is as it was. There was a whole complex. The whole idea was it was basically a farming community. And by doing all these things right there, there was a movie theater. The idea was instead of having to send your workers into Casa Grande to spend their money, why not have them spend their money right there? And so that way you made money, they stayed close to home, and everybody was happy. Now, I have not had a chance to go inside the Stanhope Farmers Market, but I do hope to get down there and get a chance to go inside. Now, if you're in the area of Stanhope and Stanfield, there are lots of interesting things. You also have Shamrock Farms is down there, and you can take a tour of the farm. You can see cows and things like that there, as well as a really large cottage cheese container. Now, also, the big house, or Casa Grande. And so that is a mud building that is now protected by a Frank Lloyd Wright structure. And that is a Casa Grande National Monument. And so that is worth a trip down there to go see as well. And then if you're driving around through kind of the wilderness, you might find in Casa Grande the neon sign park, visible especially at night when all that neon is glowing. So they've got about 10 signs down there, and I think they're working adding more to the whole experience. But that is worth a trip onto itself just to get down there. And then if you take kind of a wrong turn, you'll find the Dwarf Car Museum, which is a gentleman named Ernie, and he started building these replica cars that are about a quarter of the size, as you can see in this photo. And he has a slew of them. And so he comes out to car shows and shows them off. He tries to make them look exact as he can to the full-sized option. But indeed, they are nowhere near full size. So Stanhope, there's a lot going on around it. You've got Casa Grande as well as some other cool things that you can find near there. So a fun destination. And I do want to go into the market there and see what it looks like inside. I bet it still has the linoleum squares down there. Would love to see what the inside of the building looks like. So coming up next week, we have Gamage Theater on as a guest, and so that's going to be a lot of fun as we get to talk about I mean my own personal my love of Broadway. So I'm kind of viewing that as kind of our Valentine's Day show. Now remember, if you have questions, stories, suggestions, if you don't get a chance to put them in the comments, what you can do is you can throw a note off to me either via Facebook, Instagram, or even good old-fashioned email. You can reach out in a variety of ways. Now, don't forget, in March, second Saturday, we have our walking tour of downtown. It's about a 2-hour tour. And we get a chance to take a look at downtown that is now full of all these cranes building as we walk around talking about 20s and 30s era buildings mainly. Coming up this Sunday, actually on Valentine's Day, over on the Melrose Curve, Thunderbird Lounge is doing a pop-up market for February, and I'll have a variety of things, including we did this activity book, which is picking up my green screen, but is kind of a throwback on all those menus you would get as a kid at places like Bill Johnson's Big Apple. So there's connect the dots, word searches, things like that. Coming up on the 20th of this month, we are actually doing a program with Arizona Virtual Pride, and that is uplifting voices from our community. And we have some folks talking about growing up here in Arizona. And so that should always be good. As well, with the city of Phoenix, we are doing an LGBTQ storytelling project, and that kicks off in March. We just are getting ready to start publicizing that. So watch out if you're interested in attending either the workshop or the story circles. Now, remember, you can always check things out on my website, which is hiphistorian.com. Now, tonight, I didn't show my preview video. I focused mainly on that Legend City video that does have no sound. But again, I do want to give a huge shout out to PJ, who is constantly coming with amazing cocktails and oh so much fun. And so the video for Legend City that I have is about 3 minutes long. There is no sound. If you don't hear anything, don't think that there's something broken. It's just that in this era, there was no music, and I'm so iffy about what I can even play because I don't want anything to get squelched by Facebook or YouTube. So let's take a look at that Legend City video again. And so I do love this because my friend Ace was watching this at one point and said, hey, that's my dad. And indeed it was. So, all right. So let's play that Legend City video.